Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Welcome to this new moon forecast. We have a Gemini new moon upcoming June 6, 2024. And we're going to look at the main astrological themes for the next 2 weeks from new moon to the upcoming full moon, which will be a solstice full moon. That's right, the moon will be at 2 degrees Capricorn. The June solstice is marked by the sun reaching 0 degrees Cancer. It's kind of when you put the root systems down. So we have the solstice on the 20th or 21st, depending on where you are on the planet. But then the full moon will be right after that in the sign of Capricorn. That means the moon is opposite the sun. That's how we get a full moon. So we're going to have a solstice full moon as well. So it's going to be a very exciting time for all of us and a very difficult time, just, in pure Gemini fashion, right? For every idea, there is its antithesis, no matter what. So the mutable signs, I feel like, are being most impacted ever since the full moon in Sagittarius. And I think that's really where this cycle starts. But the third quarter moon in Pisces, special shout out to those of you who are supporting Catalyst Energies on Subscribestar, the Starseed Fellowship, the Catalyst Classroom. First and foremost, thank you for everything and your participation and everything that you offer. I did put out that weekly astrology report for y'all that was our third quarter moon in Pisces. So Pisces is mutable as well. It's Gemini, Virgo, Sag, and Pisces are all the mutable signs. That's the quality of all of the elements. And that means it's malleable, right? It's flexible. And in some cases, that is a really good quality because it allows you to kind of navigate very formlessly through things. But also, too, the mutability can be a deficit when you need to have a fixed or cardinal energy, which are the other two qualities, right? Fixed signs and cardinal signs. So the mutable signs as a whole, I think, are really affected. And so that's why I want to look and on all of us, really, right? Because this lunar cycle is very much wrapped up in the seasonal cycle as well, which affects all of us. So we're in the second half, we're certainly going to go over the Gemini forecast in and of itself. Gemini rising primarily, and then Gemini moon and sun. We're going to look at the next 2 weeks, all the major transits. There's a lot of Gemini energy, but honestly, it's all the mutable signs that are really being impacted by this cycle. Like I said, that started with the full moon in Sag. We had a third quarter moon in Pisces, which those of you who get the weekly, you're very aware of that. And there's some imagery that I brought up in that forecast about mastery, spiritual mastery, being able to kind of emotionally transcend the situation of taking a nosedive in some ways. That's the third quarter moon, that ideological crisis that is very personal and will lead us through the end of the cycle into the Gemini new moon. So the squares, this is why this cycle is going to be difficult, and why I want to look at the fixed star and the starseed astrology first, and then in the second half we'll do the specific Gemini forecast. So if you're here for the Gemini forecast, I assure you everything you're going to be hearing is relevant, and you get the added bonus of the actual horoscope for your sign after I go over the fixed star and the starseed stuff. But if you have Gemini in your chart, then chances are you have Orion starseed markings. You don't have to have Gemini in the natal or progressed chart. There are other degrees in the zodiac that designate Orion starseed origins, but chances are, if especially in the later degrees, but even from 17 degrees on, you have Orion starseed markings in your chart. And so understanding that layer of your soul, basically, is important, I think, of navigating a Gemini, just a Gemini cycle in general. So we're going to look at Orion. We're going to look at the star Rigel. We're going to look at the star Betelgeuse. The thing that's very difficult, ultimately, for everybody, I think that there is a lot of growth and a lot of metamorphosis that is going to come out of this cycle. Something very spontaneous and something that hasn't been there before has started to rise. Maybe it's something we've had an inkling of in the subconscious or the unconscious, but it's starting to make its way up. And that started with the new moon in Taurus, and now we're coming to the end of that cycle. And it's about taking what has surfaced or emerged, and actually putting it to use mentally, putting it to use in terms of ideas, creativity. So, of course, knowing where Gemini is in your chart, knowing what Gemini connections you have is certainly going to help. But we're going to look at Orion, we're going to look at Rigel and Betelgeuse, and it's the squares. There are square, and this is why I brought up the third quarter moon specifically, and how those weekly astrology reports and following the transits of the moon can be really important, because that personal crisis that the third quarter moon represented is very indicative and is an overtone of the much larger squares that are coming even in these just next 2 weeks, right? Because we have the sun, we have Mercury now, we have Venus now, Jupiter now, right? The ruling sign of Sagittarius, by the way, opposite Gemini. So Jupiter is very weak and is at its detriment in Gemini, and can really blow things out of proportion, or just kind of, expand on ideas as if they were more than just ideas. That's why I say the mutable signs, right? Sag is not getting out of this whole next lunar cycle because of all the Gemini energy. But all of those, the sun and certainly the moon at the new moon, are going to be in a square to Saturn, but Mercury and Venus are going to be in a square to Saturn. And all of them, sun, Mercury, and Venus, and eventually Jupiter, all going to be in a square to Neptune. And the stars that these planets are associated with right now in terms of the zodiac, I think are worth looking at and paying attention to, because it's in these squares, right? They're not going to be easy, right? Anything squaring Saturn and Neptune has the potential of making us want to bust through a brick wall, and then realizing that brick wall didn't even exist in the first place, right? It's just a manifestation of our own mind. And so that can be very difficult too for the Gemini people, in terms of the way that reality can be often, and identity is conceptualized, right? So there's not a lot of decisions or even one specific set of personalities, right? Gemini people very mundanely, and I don't actually agree with this, but just to give perspective, are often considered two-faced, right? Well, the reality is that they have like infinite faces, because Gemini people, in terms of the mutability of their identity, how they feel, right? If you're a Gemini moon, and certainly if you have your solar return happening this season, right? Gemini sun, then how you express yourself is very faceted, right? There's always an option. There's always choice. And there are certain things that we can't necessarily wish our way or even think our way out of. As curious as we are, and as much as that we look for options and solutions, right? Problem, reaction, solution. That is a Gemini dynamic, right? The Hegelian dialectic of Gemini, problem, reaction, solution, which then creates problem, reaction, solution, right? It's a feedback loop. It's perpetual, and that's great when you are just working in the realm of empirical data, ideas, communication, and Gemini people, right? This is the mutability is an asset, okay? It's just that when you have to surrender and bridge the gap, or bridge the two polarities together, right? Bridging matter and spirit, right? Bridging the masculine and feminine. And when you look at the glyph for Pisces, for instance, you'll see that it does kind of look like Gemini, but there is that dash in the middle. There's that bridge, and it's the bridge of source. It's spirit. It is your innate, right? It is your own intuition. It's your connection to God that is the bridge between the material experience of being human and returning back to oneness. And so Neptune being the ruling planet of Pisces, at the very last degree of Pisces, this is incredibly powerful. And what you visualize in this stage comes with you, and this is not personal, right? Neptune is not a personal planet. This is not representative of the individual subjective experience or sense of value, or even with Mercury, how our minds work. Neptune is the great dissolver, and when the boundary between this or that is dissolved every time there's a square to Neptune, that's going to be the challenge. It's almost like the square to Saturn with all of these things. Yes, it'll be challenging, but I think that challenge is if you've been doing the work and you've been really working with Saturn as much as you can throughout throughout its time in Pisces especially, then, and being mindful of where Saturn is and what it represents, right, which is time, which is the law of nature, which is restriction in the most fundamental sense, right, the bones of the universe, the natural law, right, material physics. Doesn't mean we know everything about it, but it's still bound by time. And that's part of being in this experience of humanity or physicality or materialism. I think all those squares, and we'll look at when they're going to happen, right? Mark your calendars when Sun and Venus and Mercury all square Saturn. Those will be challenges that I think can be met with the mutability factor of Gemini and Pisces, right? Yeah, Saturn may be unyielding, but our desire to find solutions, to be flexible, to be malleable, to find it, just like water, right? Yeah, there may be a barrier there, but if there is a way for the water to break through or move around or create a different channel, it will. And so I think those squares to Saturn as we go through the next 2 weeks for all of us are going to be a challenge that can be accepted. It's the Neptune squares that I think are really going to challenge people a lot and in a really intense way. And Neptune is going to retrograde before it goes into Aries. And in fact, Saturn and Neptune are slated to conjunct at 0 degrees Aries at the vernal equinox, 2026, right? And so there is a huge new opening that's brand new beginning that's coming with that in just a couple of years, and I assure you people know very much about it. So it's going to be the squares to Neptune, all the Gemini energy that I think is going to be the real challenge. So we're gonna look at those things, and the Orion starseed nature. You can get a start if you've had a starseed reading. If you get a starseed reading from me in particular, I really go into the traits of all of these starseed origins and how you can make sense of them in terms of your natal chart and in your life, right? And how, especially what planets or bodies are associated with the starseed origins. But the Orion nature, it is very solar plexus chakra, right? It is very warrior like, but in a way that is very matter of fact. It is quantitative. It has an insatiable, Orion starseeds have an insatiable thirst for knowledge. These are people who are masters at debate, right? They learn as much about their position as they learn about their opposing position, because in that process you learn the most. And the ideal Gemini, especially if you're a Gemini rising person, it is the Sag nature that is pulled out of you or that surfaces when you're in relationship. And ultimately all of that knowledge, all of that study, all of the curiosity and discovery of Gemini is meant to be synthesized and transmuted eventually. And so getting caught up in just the black and white of a situation is not in the nature of the Gemini person, right? And so sometimes it can be difficult to have those people around because they tend to not, take a hard line on, especially if they're a moon in Gemini, right? They just, it's just their moods are as mutable as thoughts, right? As the wind. So let's just get into it, right? Because I can just pontificate about this all day, because I do feel like there is some serious metamorphosis happening with this new moon, and it's already started. It started with the Sag full moon. It started with that full moon of really illuminating to what extent emotionally we all are able to see the polarity in our life or the opposition or the tension. See, that's the thing about the Orion starseed nature. It is the competition and the tension of competition that motivates the Orion starseed to be better at something, whatever it is, their skill set, their knowledge base, right? Discovery, study, learning, right? And it's the competition of having two teams against each other, right? If there is no resistance to work against, you have no means to measure your improvement. And so, yes, there's a little bit of ego with the Gemini person, but it's the full moon that really highlighted emotionally if our capacity to see the opposition, the conflict in our lives as a chess game, right? Can we be objective? Can we be more calm as we approach this situation? Think multiple moves ahead, because the information is going to start coming at us fast. And especially even right now, right? Mercury coming into Gemini, Venus and Sun coming into conjunction as of today, Jupiter and Mercury coming into a conjunction right now as well. And it's very visible in the very early morning sky, at least where I am, this conjunction in Gemini. And we're going to look at the actual astronomy software to kind of see where everything is. But it's taking the vital energies in some ways. What has spontaneously emerged out of the realm of the formless, right? This is the new moon in Taurus. We're still in that cycle for the next 2 days as of this recording. The new moon in Taurus, right? The new continent rising out of the ocean. Now what, right? It is about taking that energy, taking that, that what has emerged, taking that and utilizing that as a means to conceptualize something bigger, something grander. Now, something new has emerged. That means that there will be its antithesis, and maybe that is things have to be dispersed, right? So water, land comes out of the ocean. What happens? So the water will have to be redistributed, right? That's going to have an impact in other areas, other coastal areas. This is just an example, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction here in this Saturnian universe, right? Bound by the laws of time and nature, which is what Saturn represents. And it's all woven together perfectly, no matter what, our all personal identities and egos. And as much as we want to think our way out of any situation, or even just like delude ourselves, which, there's a lot of that Pisces energy, especially with Neptune here. It's really very smoke and mirrors with Neptune moving direct in this last degree of Pisces. And again, that's where the real challenge is going to be. And that's where it's going to be very easy not to hold the line for ourselves, so to speak. But there is so much really good potential here in this lunar cycle for some real growth. And that's what I said for the weekly when I talked about the third quarter moon in Pisces. I was like, we're going to grow up with this new moon. We are going to have a mental growing up. And yes, there's going to be a lot of information coming at us. I really think now with Mercury and Gemini, and the fact that Jupiter and Mercury came into a conjunction, I think that there's going to be a lot of information that people are going to have to start just taking in, let alone processing. And it's going to be a real challenge to the ego for everybody. It's going to be and very, I think, very difficult with the squares to Neptune, right? People are going to have some serious insecurities. They're going to be very confused about what's going on, maybe even think that the show is totally over. And my gosh, if you have not come to the conclusion that we are watching a movie, and I'm not suggesting that it's a particular group of people who are orchestrating this movie, but we're going to look at a particular Gemini chart at the very end of this report, just to give some perspective on current events and how perfectly lined up they seem to be with these major astrological transits. So somebody's planning something, and I have a feeling it's at multiple levels. So let's just get right into it, shall we? Let's just get into the fixed star astrology first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you first and foremost. There we go. Take this away. There we are. We're going to look at the astronomy software, get an idea of what we're looking at here in the actual sky. So like I said, we're going to talk about some fixed stars. So we're going to talk about Orion. We're going to talk about Betelgeuse. We're going to talk about some stars in Pisces, specifically where Saturn and Neptune are situated, and give you some basic things to just be aware of those particular fixed stars, that they have their own astrology associated with them, and just give you an idea of what they mean. And I would really encourage you to go do your own research too, because I can read it from my perspective and give you my rundown based on what I'm picking up on and how I'm interpreting this information, but it's always going to land the most when you do the work yourself and you're able to learn as much as you can from different sources. Again, if you're a Gemini person, this is right up your alley. You want to be learning as much as possible, right? You're a person who really expresses themselves through that process of learning and discovery. So here is the constellation of Orion. Let me get to the actual software itself. Okay, so you can see my cursor. So we're looking at, here's the sun here, and this black disk is the moon, because this is set at the new moon on the 6th. You also can see here is Mercury, here is Venus. Hopefully you can see that. I think you can. So let me go back. There we go. So the new moon, now when we look at starseed astrology in particular, we're looking at Western or tropical astrology. And I've explained this many times, and so if you're new here, I'm going to explain it again. And it's always good to have a review so that it just really gets entrenched in your brain, the types of astrology, so you understand what you're looking at. So tropical or Western astrology basically takes the view around us as a 360-degree dome. So we as the observer are the center, and all around us the sky is a 360-degree circle or dome. And then each 30-degree portion of that sky is designated a particular zodiac sign. So it's very mathematically precise, Western and tropical astrology. It creates angles regardless of what latitude you find the sun or the moon or any of the planets or stars. We're looking at the longitude in particular. So you can see that the sun here is technically, yes, it is in the constellation of Taurus. And so if you're looking at where things are situated in real time, then we're looking at sidereal astrology. And that often is associated with Vedic astrology and Chinese astrology, more of the Eastern. And they're both right. It's just they are different systems. So we look at tropical and Western astrology when we talk about starseed markings, or we talk about fixed stars. We're looking at the longitudinal connection, because that's what makes the angle. So it doesn't matter what latitude that the sun is. When it comes into a longitudinal alignment with the star of Rigel, which is right here, then that would count as a conjunction. So, and that's exactly what's going to happen at the new moon, that for the most part, the sun is going to be in the zodiac degree where Rigel currently is. And how is the zodiac distributed? Well, 0 degrees Aries is at the point of the vernal equinox. And of course that changes with precession. And if you don't know what precession is, you're going to have to go look it up. But basically for every 72 years, the solar system is moving a degree through the galaxy. And some systems say it's a wobble. Other systems are talking about especially much more ancient systems, are talking about our journey through the galaxy. And that is what causes precession. Either way, we can at least observe that for every 72 years, our perspective of the vernal equinox is going to move a degree. So at 0 degrees Aries, when the vernal equinox happens, which is that equal portion of light and dark, that's where the zodiac starts. So right now, Rigel in the constellation of Orion is at 16 to 17 degrees of Gemini, which is where our new moon is. So now that we're oriented in real time, in actual space, the sky itself, excuse me, now we can start talking about the other connections, and certainly the new moon in relation to Rigel in particular. So what I like to do is just kind of share a little bit about this star. It is Rigel, but it's also Beta Orionis, if you want to look up the designation. So it's a multiple star system. It's in the left foot of Orion, as you can see. Yep, it's in the left foot, right? So here's the shield, and here's the club, and here's the body of Orion. So Rigel's down here, the left foot, the forward foot. And it is very visible to the naked eye. And like I said, it's made up of 4 stars. So there's Rigel B is a binary, and then Rigel A and C are both single stars. And so there's a specific set of traits associated just with the fixed star Rigel in ancient astrology. So a lot of times they will have give the nature of some of these stars will have the nature of a specific planet, and different philosophers and astrologers will often make different designations. So, but some of the things about Rigel, considering that it's the front or forward foot of Orion, which is this warrior, there is a lot of benevolence and honor and riches and glory and renown and high honors, a lot of good luck and wealth, great ambition, that kind of stuff. There's just a lot of usually kind of forward acting, forward thinking, very preferred type of energy, especially things like military or anything like that are connected to Rigel. So honor, splendor, riches, happiness. Again, this is through astrologyking.com, so you can go there and look at all the fixed stars and read their write-up as well. So the idea here is that it can be a bad influence for especially, and this is what I mean. It's really just a matter of like what position you want to take with any of these situations. If you're foolish and impious, right? Then it's not exactly going to be the best situation, right? It's people will be clinging to the illusions of youth because they are not willing to step forward and start growing into the people or the society or the community that represents their highest version of themselves. So people who are apt to be self-reliant will be successful, and I do feel like that this new moon for people, especially Gemini people, obviously, but all of us, there's going to be so much potential for this success stepping forward with this new moon. It shows a character that will take on anything, right? But you have to be careful that your courage is used with wisdom and sincere purpose. And again, this is part of the maturity of the mental metamorphosis that goes along with this new moon, okay? And so you don't want, the thing is, it will backfire. If you flaunting things, or if you have this vanity, then yeah, it's not going to go well with this new moon. And of course, that will be made visible to all of us, right, through the full moon in Capricorn, which is a very specific Sabian symbol of, hey, when there is a downside to power, basically, and you have to use it for the right reasons. And so you're going to find people misusing their power and stepping forward and trying to control things with this, and it is not necessarily going to go well. You have other people that are going to step into this position and using their character and their courage with wisdom and sincere purpose, and there's going to be some serious success that comes out of this new moon, right? And it has a lot to do, I think, with what spontaneously emerged, and how we emotionally and very personally, maybe subconsciously, if the full moon was more illuminating your otherwise hidden subconscious, our ability to be able to look at any situation above the circumstances. We have to be in the circumstances, and we have to work with the details and be here now in this moment, but we also have to allow for that part of ourselves that is infinite, right? Our soul, and our innate and our own intuition and purpose, right? A sense of moral integrity to be able to have that vast look. And again, that's going to be a big part of the solstice full moon as well. Fixed star Rigel rules the center of the breastbone. Oh, really? That sounds like the heart chakra to me, friends. And now remember, the heart chakra The human heart chakra is the green heart chakra. The thymus is the higher heart or the upper heart chakra, right? The compassionate heart chakra. Both of these are important, but I would say Orion and Rigel in particular, right there in the heart chakra, which is the bridge. It is the human heart, the bridge, the vulnerability of the human heart to stay open, yet to be able to handle the disappointment, or not even that, the sorrow, just to have your heart break and not have it pulled in and be so cerebral and mental that you don't want to be AI, and that is a real risk with some people, that they never get to that stage of feeling where they keep their feeling self open regardless. And it's not to say you're martyring yourself. It is about being human and being present with the experience of being human, even if it's not what you want, even if it's difficult, right? And that's the other thing about Rigel and Orion, is being able to face the antithesis of anything and look at it objectively and calmly, but also not losing one's humanity. So I don't know what's going to, listen, I'm not here to necessarily predict what exactly is going to happen in June, because I think there's something to be said for the mystery always. But it seems pretty clear based on the transits and just the trajectory of things in general that, there's going to be some outrageous information and experiences that will kind of force us into growing up mentally as we move forward. So Rigel is where the new moon is going to be. So if we look at more of the Sabian symbol energy of this new moon, the head of a robust youth changes into that of a mature thinker, right? Robust youth, it's all piss and vinegar, robust youth, right? And then the mature thinker is a different story entirely, and that doesn't come without some sort of challenge. That doesn't come without some sort of like challenge to the ego. So those are the squares to Saturn that are going to be coming. So if we look, the head of a robust youth changes into that of a mature thinker, the transformation of physical vitality into the power to build concepts and intellectual formulations through which knowledge can be transferred, right? Emotions are transmuted into mind, instincts into thoughts, okay? There's a certain amount of development here. And a defeat, now the downside of this, like I said, a defeat of accomplishment by a senseless clinging to the illusions of youth, right? So you're still trying to accomplish something, right? You still have that foot forward, right? Rigel. But at the same time, the defeat can be very real. And again, Saturn and Neptune, the squares to Saturn and Neptune for all of us are going to really challenge that. And you'll see, like, what is it that we try to do? What if we feel like we're losing power, right? What if we are defeated in our accomplishment? And it's our own unwillingness, right? It's kind of like Peter Pan syndrome. There's a lot of that energy too. If we're going to step forward with this power and this courage, it can't be just to satisfy some base desire or without giving up something, without growing intentionally. So, oh boy. And the new moon will be in a square to Saturn. So let's actually look real quick here at the astrological chart for the Gemini rising so that we can see what's going on. I know we're kind of jumping around here, but that's okay. It's just what feels right now. It's very Gemini energy, okay? And I'll tell you what, I don't have a lick of Gemini in my natal chart, not a single thing, but I have and it's all Sag, right? I have a healthy, hefty Sag stellium, but my draconic chart, right, the oversoul, it's complete opposite. It's all in Gemini. So the soul is really driving right now, at least for me, which is why it's important to know not just your natal chart, your progress chart, your draconic chart. It's so easy to get caught up in your natal chart and be like, what am I going to do for me? Right? The soul is definitely, pushing, and that's what the nodes of the moon are in the natal chart. Understanding these things and having and the starseed astrology as well, these multiple layers of galactic astrology to kind of get a much more thorough picture of what's going on, because not everything is going to go the way that our egos or identities want, or how we feel. It's not going to go how we want. That's been happening for years now, and especially it is intensified since the beginning of the Chinese New Year, right? Since February, the first thing that's going to happen is the square to Saturn with the new moon itself, right? And so for the Gemini rising, and if you're sun and moon, this is still going to be relevant to you in terms of overall themes. The Pisces energy is in your 10th house. It is in the area of your public professional life. It is, and to have Saturn here, I mean, it is really putting power in this area. And of course, Neptune in the 10th house, transiting the 10th house, is at the same time, as much as you're trying to establish some sort of real power, some sort of even political power in this area, Neptune just comes through, of course, and has been for years now, is broadening that professional release of power into something ideal and humanitarian. And at the same time, with Saturn here now, giving it a structure and a scaffolding, which is great in a lot of ways. It's just that as the Gemini person, maybe coming into exploring and discovering a new version of themselves, this is really going to be challenged by the current professional and public profile, your career, whatever that is, right? Career doesn't have to be as narrowly defined as we think of it now, right? Career is really just, what is your contribution? What societal structures are you contributing your works and labors to, right? So it can be, 10th house can be more of like the economy as a whole, or corporation as a whole, or an industry that you're a part of as a whole. Maybe it's really just where your power is released, right? Your professional life is where your power is released. Maybe it's your family dynamic. It's like the family structure as a whole. Maybe it's a government, right? Maybe it's a country that you're part of, or some other structure that you are contributing to materially in some way, whether it's your resources or your labor. So these are very powerful energies to contend with, as the identity of the Gemini person in particular is going through a metamorphosis. And maybe you have been a robust youth, and that has influenced your public profile, and you're growing, and you're changing, and you are accomplishing things, and you're becoming more mature as a person. And that is going to be challenged by what is currently set up in the areas of your professional life, the zenith of your destiny. My gosh, talk about how destabilizing that can be when you are changing, and something as intense as the zenith of your destiny is in cross purposes to that change, and what kind of effect it can have. Gemini. It's just not going to be predictable. And of course, that's all the Uranus energy, especially big time with all the trines to Uranus when everything was, or conjunctions to everything when it was in Taurus, right? That it's unpredictable, and there are aspects of change that are beyond just our own individual minds, right? And experiences, that they are a bridge to something way greater. So we have to go through the process of facing the conflict, being in the conflict, conceptualizing whatever the conflict is, even if it's a conflict of ideas, a conflict of communication, maybe it's a conflict in learning. It just depends, of course, where Gemini is for you in your chart. If you are Gemini rising, though, it is definitely conflict in the persona you project out into the world, changing and growing up. And maybe these squares are exactly what's needed in order to facilitate that process. And how you manage that is going to determine how your power is really used emotionally when we get to the full moon. Oh my Lord. Okay. The moon is going to be in a square. The new moon is going to be in a square to Saturn, which means that it's going to give some sort of emotional preview to all of the squares to Saturn that are going to come in the following days, which will be Venus, and then the Sun, and then eventually Mercury is going to be in a square to Saturn, all three of them, right? Which, again, that resistance of an unmovable movable object might be exactly the type of energy needed for the Orion Starseed to be like, you know what, this is just making me buckle down even more. So first off, the moon in a square to Saturn just, in general, is very depressing, right? It restricts and depresses relationships. It becomes more challenging for you to connect to other people. There's sadness, there's loneliness, there's guilt. And where is Saturn? And this is important in terms of how these other squares are going to really affect all of us, but certainly the Gemini people. There's bitterness, there's low self-esteem when the moon squares Saturn, just in general, right? And you could be held back from being more open, right? You can just have that kind of depressed, like Eeyore type of energy. Other people or circumstances can cause distance in relationships. You could feel isolated. You could feel some guilt about a situation. There could be normal relationships can kind of get kind of cold, or there could be other types of events that could that could be creating emotional distance in your relationships. That's things that you don't have any control over necessarily, right? That could be travel or weather events or something like this, and you just feel sad and lonely. It's such a moon square Saturn is just such an Eeyore type of energy, and again, sadness and loneliness and guilt and shame, and especially being reminded of like past failures and grief is something that comes up as well. So just take responsibility for your emotional reactions, because that is going to go a long way in terms of how the rest of these squares unfold. So Saturn is in a degree when it comes into a square with the Sun and Venus and Mercury in particular. It'll move into the 19 to 20 degree mark. And that, oh man, I didn't even bring it over to, I'm so sorry. See, this is because I have no Gemini in my natal chart. Like, details are just escape me. Okay, there we are. Sorry, guys. If you've just been listening, it doesn't really matter. But if you are looking at the screen and you are utilizing what I'm showing you as like a visual aid, my apologies. So, but you can see here that this is, all of this stack up in Gemini, in the Gemini first house. Saturn and Neptune are in Pisces in the 10th house for Gemini rising. All of this still applies that I just talked about. So the square to the new moon itself will be in a square. If we go a couple hours to just show it, will be in a square to Saturn. So it's really going to be carried through this whole cycle, these squares to Saturn. Again, Saturn transiting the 10th house is, really about establishing some serious political power, right? And when I say political, like, take that very loosely, right? Because you're talking about institutional power. And Saturn is not the same as Jupiter in the sense of like, hey, let's manage this, right? It's like, it's the judge, right? Making the decision, carrying out the sentence, so to speak, and is, again, it's unyielding. It is the law, right? It is the letter of the law being enacted in the 10th house. And so this can be, but at least it's an immutable sign, and which is great for Gemini people. So there is ways that the individual Gemini person in particular is able to be flexible even in their own sense of self based on what Saturn is presenting. So Saturn's going to move into 19 to 20 degrees Pisces. And that's where pretty much all of these squares are going to happen. And that degree is very interesting. It says the degree itself is, at the right, a table set for an evening meal, okay? And right now it's sitting at a degree of a master instructing the disciple, right? The uninterrupted transmission of the sacred knowledge from master to teacher, right? From guru to devotee, right? Just use it as an image to make sense of the degree. Which is, as much as we want to learn about ourselves, as much as we want to, discover new aspects of who we are, for, Gemini people in particular, then, but Saturn, especially in the 10th house, is like, there is structure that is providing those lessons, right? The 10th house is like very paternal in a lot of ways, right? It is that energy, like I said, it's the judge, it is the letter of the law. And the square, these first of these squares, is like it's gonna be through this restriction that the mental maturity is going in the identity of the Gemini person is gonna come about. Okay, so it starts here, and so yeah, it's gonna feel kind of like restricting and depressing, and may feel like that you just can't get out from the structure of the institutions that you are in. But it's in that resistance that the lesson, that the instruction is being passed through. And then when we get to the other squares and Saturn is in the 20 degree of Pisces, right? The table set for an evening meal, right? The idea that at the right time and place, everything that is already linked together through the sacred fractal of life is going to be where it needs to be. Right? And again, that's going to be very challenging to the ego with the Sun square Saturn. It's going to be very challenging to a sense of personal satisfaction with Venus in a square to Saturn. And it's going to be when Mercury, and this is all in the next 2 weeks. It's exciting times for the Gemini people. The Mercury square Saturn is going to be that moment, I think, where the Gemini people in particular really buckle down, and they're just like, all right, let's make the most of this resistance, whatever it is. I'm not going to necessarily be able to force, I want to sit down at the buffet and just eat whatever I want. And Saturn's just like, well, that's great, but when it's the right time, we all sit down to dinner together, right? And that is what Saturn represents in all of these squares. So it's going to come right up in the new moon. And so just be aware that if you're feeling that way, it's not going to last, at least emotionally. But hold on in some ways, or at least be mindful of how you're feeling, because that's giving you a sense internally of what these squares are going to maybe bring up in your life and your sense of identity and self throughout the next 2 weeks. Okay, so what I want to do is go back to the I want to go back to this here, the what is this called? Astronomy software. Because I want to show you where Saturn is right now, and the degree that is associated with 18, 19, 20 degrees of Pisces. And here we go. And you can see Neptune is here too. Now Saturn is technically in the constellation of Aquarius. Let's see if the boundaries, yes. It's still technically in the constellation of Aquarius. It's in the boundary of it, but it's in conjunction with this particular star, which is Beta Pisceum, or it has another name that I'm going to share with you, and that is the fixed star Fum al Samaka, right? Or Beta Pisceum. So again, Astrology King, you can go look this up. This is a fixed star at 18 degrees, 35 minutes of the zodiac sign of Pisces. And as you can see, it is not in the fish itself. It is at the mouth of the fish. Different from Fomalhaut, which is the mouth of the fish of the one singular southern fish. This is the constellation of Pisces, right? The two fish. This star is at the mouth of the fish. And this is where, again, Saturn is very closely aligned longitudinally. So what does this really represent here? It's a single star. It's in the mouth of the western fish. And these names are Arabic, right? And it's got a very high spiritual nature, but few can respond to this, okay? Right? Now think about it. The table is set, and at the right time, we all sit down together. That requires an incredible amount of trust and an ability to know, right? There is a fondness for power, so there's ability to gain victory over one's enemies and the ability to command. These are all part of this star, Fum al Samaka, or where Saturn is in alignment, the mouth of the western fish in the Pisces constellation, right? So there's a lot of victory over enemies. There's a fondness for power. There's ability to gain great authority. And when you're talking about Saturn, you're talking about the supreme authority, right? The judge, the restriction of natural law. So let's see, what else is there? There were so many things here that came out with this particular. And actually, Astrology King does make a reference to Dane Rudger and the astrological mandala about a master instructing the pupil. The transfer of power and knowledge which keeps the original spiritual and creative impulse of the cycle active and undeviated, right? Now, I want you to think about that phrase, okay? The original spiritual and creative impulse of the cycle, right? Active and undeviated. Are we able to despite the details shifting and changing, information being brought up that changes how we think about something, things, details change. That is the nature of nature, right? But there is an original spiritual and creative impulse that is always there, and which is spirit, which is source, which is God, which is divinity. And this is the transfer of that power and knowledge through this degree of Pisces, which is where Saturn is. Let's see, there's an ability here to be attuned to an inner sense of direction in fast changing times, right? And I do feel like it will be fast changing. I just don't think there's any way around it. I would love if things just calm down, believe me, and I just don't see it. And so it's about, that inner compass being calibrated, an inner sense of direction in fast changing times. And this is where the restriction or the unyielding nature of Saturn can be an asset in this particular situation. So this is a very, I think, so like I said, this is going to be where the Sun and Venus and Mercury all come into a square during the next week. So there'll be all these challenges, Gemini, for and let's look at those dates, because I think those are really important. And again, I know we're jumping around, but yeah, you're Gemini. You can handle the seemingly mutable quality of this particular forecast, because it really is all over the place, but it does have a purpose. So what I want to do here is, yes, we're going to go back to the chart and start looking at those particular days. Like I said, the first thing that's going to happen is that Venus is going to square Saturn on the 8th. And then what we're going to see after that is then the squares that are going to come after the Virgo moon, the squares that are going to be happening with Neptune. And that's a whole other ball of wax. So yes, these are going to be challenges. So whatever comes out during this time, Venus in a square to Saturn, the Sun in a square to Saturn, both of these are going to cause stress in your love, especially Venus, right? It's going to cause stress in your love life. There's hindrances due to fear or criticism, especially in the 10th house. And it could go both ways, right? There's an ability to maintain harmony in relationships. And this is as the harmony maintainer, as the Venus in the sign of Gemini, right? So it would be better to spend some time alone, but don't necessarily ignore the affection and love of others either. You may have to just kind of, you may not want to necessarily go seek it out, if that makes any sense. But if people are coming to you that are part of your spiritual web, that are people who are going to be sitting at the table with you at the end, then maybe don't push them away necessarily. But you don't want to be piling everything onto your relationship plate just as a way to kind of assuage or deal with the disharmony or the stress that this square, in particular Venus, is bringing up in terms of relationships, your social life, things like that. And just the way that you present yourself to the world. It's very common under a Venus square Saturn influence to feel lonely and depressed. So there's going to be more of this. It's very typical. It's about not feeding into it. It's not identifying with it, which can be difficult when we're talking about a first house or, the sun or moon in a sign, right? It's very easy to identify with that energy. It will pass though, and you can return to your peaceful existence. And that's what these squares are about. It's like it's going to be a challenge, and then it's going to be like, okay, can I keep that equilibrium? Can I keep that higher spiritual perspective? Not bypassing, not leaving the body, right? Not staying in, that state of samadhi, 24/7 and just give up being human, right? Because that's where people go when they commit suicide, right? They decide they're done. They want to they're done with being human, and they want to go back to merging with oneness. And there's going to be more of that. That was something in my life this year that I've not been public about at all. And so the fact that I'm even bringing it up is kind of shocking me. But, there's a suicide in my immediate family in February. So there's going to be more. And there have been, like, I know I'm hearing a lot about it, and I don't want to be morbid. It's just the potentials that exist right now. And I assure you, they are being poked at because these potentials exist right now just by virtue of these transits, and the potential is there. And so what better way to cause chaos than to, push people over the edge in a myriad of ways. So just please be aware that, like, if you're feeling this way, number one, the suicide hotline, oh my gosh, I can't believe is it 988? Hold on, I gotta know, so I know that it's, yes, okay, 988. If you're feeling any suicidal ideation, please call 988 and talk to a trained professional or somebody who is there for that purpose, because these things do pass. And you return to a sense of peace, right? But it will be a test. And somebody actually just brought this up to me yesterday in a text exchange about, like, being tested. And I was like, dude, this is going to be this whole month of June. And some people are so ahead of the curve because they've already been going through the tests, and they are already seeing, especially with the full moon in Sag, you're like, okay, can I, like, stay above these things? Venus square Saturn can really have you lack motivation and certainly lack some patience, I would say. And you either lazy, or you want things to just kind of come to you, and you don't want to have to necessarily work for them when Venus is in a square to Saturn. But this is no time to ignore your responsibility, especially people that are loved ones or they're valued in your life, right? You may feel low and you may feel lonely, but somebody else may really be depending on you, and you would really let them down if you don't follow through. And I would say that this is a great way to kind of deal with your loneliness and depression, is to just push through it and be of service to someone else, even if you are really struggling, because that usually is what helps me when I'm in my really darkest. Right after this, of course, is when the sun comes into a square with Saturn, and Venus and the sun are, very close together right now as well. And so there's been a lot of really nice energy around that. It's just the square to Saturn, of course, that's going to challenge that as per usual. Now, this is the ego suffer, right? This is tests and challenges that lead to pessimism. So again, this time period could really be a lot of depression, a lot of challenges to the ego, pessimism. You may be really getting annoyed and pissed off and pessimistic that your goals, things are getting in your way. Let's put it that way. And again, you want to sit down and pile everything onto your plate from the cafeteria. And Saturn's like, no, there is a time, there is a place when it's all perfect. And so that's going to be really difficult. You may feel restricted or weighed down by, again, responsibilities, because that's Saturn. And I would say responsibilities in your public and professional life, whatever that is for you. This is a test of character. And it would be best if you strive to meet your obligations, right? So don't give up on what you've already committed to in this situation, as long as it's in alignment with your integrity and, has to do, especially if it has to do with relationships, because of the Venus nature as well. Don't expect to feel lighthearted or happy because of coming under pressure through time limits, other essential duties. Your needs might be placed in the background to complete the task. And again, Gemini people, this is where that mutability really comes in, like learning to just kind of table where you are. And so being a person that has worked either as a social worker and, one-on-one client work, and working as a social worker for many, many, many years, decades, one thing I have learned to do over time is to check your shit at the door. And sometimes you just need to do that. And boy, that can be really that can be a really nice break, a breather from our own drama, right? Our own bullshit, right? Just leave it at the door for a while and just come back to it later after you have fulfilled responsibilities to someone else. And I'm not saying that you should not acknowledge your own needs, but my gosh, we get so hyper fixated on ourselves and what we want and how we feel that, sometimes we need to just table that for a little while and just do something, meet our responsibilities, our duties, wherever that is, right? And you might come under pressure, right? Because this is a sun, this is your ego and expression. And so when Saturn's in a square to it, you can definitely feel that pressure and feel like kind of lashing out in some ways, especially if you're getting criticism or rejection. So you have to be patient, you have to be determined, and have a strong work ethic. It's going to be a really difficult couple of days, and the new moon is going to have the signature of this square to Saturn with it. So it's going to carry it throughout the whole month. The problem is that you'll want to buck the system, Gemini, and avoid your responsibilities. You'll even avoid them with guilt. You'll just say, screw it, I'll just feel sad about it or guilty about it. Don't avoid your responsibilities. This could lead to worse situations. And remember what I talked about with Rigel and the energy of that fixed star and the Orion Starseed nature of, the competition, the restriction, right? That resistance. And this is actually a big part of where this is going in terms of the quarter moon. We'll get there because the quarter moon in Virgo is in a square, obviously, to the Gemini sun. It's all about this, right? Using that resistance to skate upon, right? As a means to be like, here, I can triumph over this chaos. Look at me. In a way that is very playful and enjoyable in some cases. But you have to, if you're going to move forward, you're going to step forward, you're going to take everything that comes along with that situation, including some setbacks, including some resistance, including some pessimism or responsibilities that are in the way of you discovering yourself. I was listening to the Ram Dass live stream channel. I've been listening off and on for a couple months now, and just when I really need some perspective, I'll just go and listen, and it's just endless. And it's on a loop, and one of the loops right now he's talking about people that are, wanting to get into serious meditation, but then they're just like, oh, but my kids. And he's just like, maybe your kids are your dharma, right? It's not about this specific thing. It's about, what's right in front of you and taking responsibility. And that's Saturn all the way. So if you're going to step forward with that Rigel energy, right, you're going to come to a maturity in your mental state. There's going to be some difficult things that we're going to have to do. Even though you may try to ignore the consequences, your subconscious is going to remember, and you're going to just carry that worried feeling the whole time. So the longer you procrastinate, whatever it is, the worse it's going to get. So just do it, whatever it is, right? And just do it with a sense of like, I committed to this is my responsibility. Yes, this is maybe challenging my sense of self or discovering myself or how I feel, but it's not forever. And there's something to be learned here, right? So, and you may feel like you're being hard done with this, and you may experience rejection and isolation. I mean, this seems to be a theme over and over again. And for how beneficial I think this new moon is really going to be for Gemini, I seem to be using the words rejection, isolation, and sadness quite a bit. But that is all about your perspective. It really is. In Gemini, you have a choice about perspective, who you want to be in these situations. The sooner you get the hard work done, the sooner your self-confidence is going to return anyway. So you think Orion as a warrior, you think that he's just going to like shrink every time it gets difficult or just like crawl into, his man cave because he's feeling rejected? No, he's a warrior and he's putting that foot forward. So I would just kind of encourage you to really remember that when the 8th and 9th roll around and these squares are becoming really very prevalent, okay? Which is going to be what, Thursday, Friday? Let me go look at the chart here. Oh, sorry, Saturday and Sunday. And I think Father's Day is coming too. So speaking of Saturn and paternity. So you'll be better placed the next time you face an obstacle. So we're going to move on now. Okay, sorry. I had to pause that because there was a nexus of all of these things that happened all at once. And I was like, I need to pause this. Okay, so jumped ahead here to the 12th of June. So we're getting into first quarter moon territory. And as you can see on the chart, there are a lot of red lines just in general. Mars and Pluto are going to be in a square. Mercury and Saturn are going to be in a square as well. So Mercury is going to be, which is your ruling planet, Gemini, is going to be in a square. This is Wednesday the 12th. So this is where it turns into hard mental work, right? Up until this point, there had been a lot of challenges with the squares to Saturn, and now Mercury's in a square to Saturn. And it's like computing, it's about paying attention to detail, tidying up your paperwork, studying. Now, there is negative thinking and misunderstanding that can come along with this as well. But because as a Gemini person and Mercury being in the sign of Gemini, I feel like it's really going to take precedence in terms of the tension in the square. And so it can be really used to your advantage of hard mental work. It might have to be done alone, but it's important to take your time with important decisions and negotiations, right? You may need some professional advice. Don't necessarily rely exclusively on the words of other people, and be careful with your own. And I would say, Gemini, since this is in your sign and Mercury is your ruling planet, especially a Mercury Gemini rising person, you want to make sure that you are very careful with your own words and pick them very cautiously and with full awareness. And so maybe it's not the moment to necessarily communicate your plans and ideas, but to tidy up your own contracts or negotiations. Now, there could be bad news, absolutely, with this Mercury square Saturn, that can affect your mental health, right? And you can be, again, feeling lonely or gloomy thoughts. And it's very easy to think about the worst side of things in this situation. But again, the resistance, especially for Orion Starseed people, if you have Sun, Moon, or Rising in Gemini and you have the Orion Starseed connections, I mean, this is one of those transits. It's like, I'm going to get the most out of this conflict and really buckle down. Like I said, it may not be time to communicate your plans or ideas, but it may be time to seek wise counsel or to seek advice or take your time to consider all of the details of something really important. Or it may be bad news. It's possible. But I would say, based on all of the squares leading up to it's really going to be an extension of what's been going on leading up to this point. And also, right around this time, it's the day before Mars is in a square to Pluto, and this is a really great transit to give you courage and willpower, right? But it also leads to people trying to gain control over others or situations, like power struggles and confrontations. And Pluto is in the ninth house, and so belief systems and big picture, broad perspectives are going through the metamorphosis of Pluto right now. Even if you play it safe, you're going to have to deal with other people being dominating or challenging you. And so this just gives you courage and willpower. And with Mars moving into the 12th house of the Gemini rising, moving into Taurus, this is going to be very grounded in spiritual courage and willpower. You definitely just want to be able to express this energy in as much a non-aggressive action as you can. And you also don't want to end up being a victim, right? Strive for success, but be very careful. Again, there's a lot of calculated, very serious mental energy, along with a lot of courage and willpower, and just a lot of energy to meet your goals here. And just as long as you're avoiding cruelty and jealousy and underhanded tactics, I think it'll be okay. And you don't need to be overly assertive or make people feel threatened with this type of transit. You can, absolutely, and it'll be stuff that you don't anticipate, and it'll be really intense, kind of bolts of lightning in some ways that are going to make change. But again, maybe this is exactly the type of energy that is necessary in order to facilitate something that really needs to change. People with more power than you are going to have the upper hand in this situation, right? You don't want to make enemies, and you certainly don't want to you don't want to make people feel threatened. You just don't want to get into it with people. But at the same time, you might have a need to climb the ladder and achieve a more powerful position. Do it the right way with, again, there's never a right way to do a wrong thing. Okay, so, and that's something that I would say is really important here, is like there is courage and willpower to compete and to win. But if you can't temper that desire to gain control over others or situations, you can bet there's going to be power struggles and confrontations. And maybe Mercury squaring Saturn after that is just going to be that much more of a disappointment, right? That it's just going to seem like things are going nowhere. So all the red lines are usually very difficult aspects in astrology. So, and you can see that Lilith and Neptune are opposite each other as well. So I don't want to make this too long, so that's not something I'll go into necessarily here. That's something that I'll save for the weekly. So that's something that you may want to consider in the future, right? That the subscription through Subscribestar gets you weekly astrology reports as well as other benefits, and all that stuff is, you know where it is. It's linked in the description box. I don't need to go into all of that. If you want more information, how to get a hold of me, what I have to offer, everything you need is below in this video. I'm here to give you the astrology of the new moon. So the first quarter moon, and then we're going to get into the squares of Neptune, and then I think that's really going to do it for this report. So the first quarter moon is going to be in a square to the sun in Gemini, so the moon will be in Virgo, right? So we're still working with mutable energy. And this is where the sun at 24 degrees of Gemini, and this is on the 14th. This is Flag Day. This is also Donald Trump's birthday. And talk about a Gemini, right? I did say that we would look at his chart. And I don't want it to go on for too long, but I really do want to look at his chart. So maybe I'll do a separate video for that. Just because I don't know if time is actually going to allow me to go much further than I'm already going. So the moon will be at its apogee. So it is going to be furthest away from the Earth at the time of its square to the sun. And that 24 degrees Gemini is the children skating over a frozen village pond, right? The idea here is that it's the resistance of the frozen water that gives the children an opportunity to skate over it in the first place, right? Your triumph over chaos or entropy. And, the Gemini energy of the resistance is providing something for me to work against, to get better at. If there wasn't resistance, I wouldn't be able to show my ability to overcome this resistance, right? And the moon in Virgo is really, in terms of that first quarter moon, right? The crisis in action are, there's an innocence. There is a be as a little child type of energy here that we're really tasked with, well, what do we do, right? There's both imagery in these two symbols having to do with being innocent and being children, but one is being present in one's innocence, just being with oneself, and the other is actually doing something, right? The Gemini energy of skating over the pond. And again, it's not an either or when you have a square. It's just the discomfort of the square is the space where we learn something. So without the innocence of the beginner's mind, there is no ability to enjoy the process of meeting the resistance, right? And I think that's probably one of the best ways to go about it. And of course, this is where we're going to have our Mercury cazimi, right? Mercury and the sun conjunct at the same degree in Gemini. So, I mean, they're also, I think, going to be some of those aha moments, right? About with the Mercury cazimi or Mercury conjunct the sun, right? That things get way more, that mental energy, get more talkative, more communicative, right? The thoughts are just going to be moving, and it's going to have a lot to do with this is how I move over the resistance, right? This is how the resistance works for me. This is how I can show that I can utilize the conflict in my life as a means to demonstrate my ability to, glide across it. So by the time we get to this area of the lunar cycle, which is the first half coming into the second, or first quarter coming into the second quarter, I think there will be some kind of aha moments of like, oh, okay, now this is where it gets really challenging, because just as soon as there is a frozen pond for us to innocently skate across and be like, oh, look, I'm doing it. As soon as that happens, then we start getting all the, well, we're going to have oppositions to Neptune with the moon and Lilith, but then we start getting into the squares with Neptune. And so for as much as there's that resistance, Neptune comes along and dissolves every boundary, right? Just as we were like getting comfortable with being able to utilize the conflict in our lives, or the resistance in our lives, or our thought processes, or even in communication, anything we're learning, right? Sometimes it's so easy to be like, well, I don't agree with that. And you just turn it off. And it's like, no, maybe we should lean in a little bit. Maybe that beginner's mind is where we really learn, when we dive into or meet that resistance. Well, then we come into the 16th, when Venus comes into a square with Neptune at the last degree of Pisces. And again, there is no boundary anymore. That's where the resistance is like, pulled out from under us. And Venus square Neptune can lead to insecurity about ourselves. We may think that people are looking at us really funny. There are distorted impressions that we are picking up on. And for the Gemini person, very much in terms of identity and self-expression, a poor self-image definitely can happen for the Venus or for the Gemini people with this square. Can lead to all kinds of relationship difficulties, right? You can have a disappointment if there's a tendency to over-idealize your romantic interest at this time, or even over-idealize yourself, ignoring your own obvious faults, which are plain for others to see. This type of square is going to, make that even more obvious. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Okay, both situations leave you susceptible to significant disappointment. There's just a lot of confusing influences when anything is in a square to Neptune, but with Venus in particular, poor self-esteem, lack of self-discipline, more susceptible to the depressive influence of all kinds of substances, right? So you may want to be very mindful about what type of things you're using. An overdose, infection, that kind of stuff is really high with a Venus square Neptune. But I'd say for the Gemini people, because Venus is in your sign, poor self-esteem and self-image, insecurity about yourself, because of what's happening in the professional or public setting for you. Sorry about that. I didn't want to cough or drink anything in the microphone. Those are both things that are like huge pet peeves of mine. So, and sometimes it just can't be helped in the moment, especially when you don't edit things. But I just wanted to pause it so I could take a nice big drink of tea. So what I want to talk about before we finish up here specifically with the and again, there's a beginner's mind energy, right? And so Neptune is the great dissolver. It kind of does that. It's just like, it's like taking psychedelics and like the whole operating system is, wiped clean when, especially, DMT or psilocybin, even like high doses of LSD, for instance, right? I don't even know if I can say these things on YouTube. I'm not suggesting or endorsing them. I'm just giving you the objective expectation here of those experiences, right? Which is, it just wipes it clean. So Neptune is the great dissolver, especially in this last degree of Pisces. Discernment is really critical here, because it's all here, and what we take with us into the next cycle is going to be like, the seed point. And so it can be everything and anything and whatever we're visualizing, right? So wiping the slate clean in some ways is not exactly a terrible thing, especially for that beginner's mind energy, which is, we're still in this first quarter moon phase by this point on the 16th, which is, that's the real challenge. Like, do you need that resistance to go further, right? And Neptune's going to be like, well, let's see. Let's find out how, masterful you really are. And so what I'd like to share with you is the star Shiat, which is at Beta Pegasi, so it's in the Pegasus constellation. So if you were to, you can look at astronomy software. and find the Pegasus constellation. And we looked on it earlier, and we saw that Neptune and Saturn are very close in terms of their declination. Right, they're at the same latitude, basically parallel to each other almost, but Neptune is a little further along and is in alignment with the star in the Pegasus constellation, and it's called Chiat or Beta Pegasi. Now, there's a lot of energy attached to this star as well. And I would encourage you to go to astrologyking.com, go to the fixed star tab, and find this at 29 to 30 degrees Pisces, and look at all the things. Right, this is an energy that can be very negative and very unfortunate, right? So it has a lot of energy in terms of tidal waves or violent storms, right? But when we get up and losing one's life in catastrophes or suicide, it definitely mentions that, accidents and stuff like that. So in a mundane chart, right, there's all kinds of examples of like really big, outrageous things that happen when certain things were in conjunction with this star. There is a positive influence here but only for the people, only for some people, and it really affects their creativity, right? And they have to be able to accept and receive the flow. And that's where the beginner's mind, again, of this first quarter moon in Virgo really comes into effect. And so there's something here about great mastery, right? That we all want to achieve this great mastery. And when we get to the very end of the zodiac, we can kind of delude ourselves, right? And be like, we're ready to sit with the gods, right? We've got it all figured out. And we've achieved our great mastery. But if we started out with the right frame of mind here, right? That we have wisdom and a sincere purpose, then there's really no need to exhibit that mastery in any way, or a need to wish for more than we already have. And this is where the test of like, do we need that resistance truly, or can that even be taken away and we'll be actually able to be okay? So we can recognize, hopefully, the quiet, unassuming, untroubled, true master from the embattled, imprisoned pretender, right? The interloper, as it were. So it does have a very nasty reputation in astrology, this particular star. And there's plenty of examples of people that have positive manifestations, right? And it's all about, how you approach the end of a cycle and your level of mastery, which kind of goes back to the third quarter moon in Pisces that we just had leading up to this new moon, which was a real test of like, can you stay emotionally in this spiritual, mental realm of mastery as you as a personality are taking a nosedive into a situation. And as I said before, there is considerable maturity at a mental level, and for the Gemini people as a personality that is coming with this new moon, with these caveats in place, and certainly with all of the challenges having to do with the squares to Saturn and Neptune. So we have Venus in a square to Neptune on the 16th. We have Mercury in a square to Neptune on the 17th. And then they both Venus and Mercury come into Cancer. They conjunct, right? Talk about putting your roots down and making a decision about something in terms of your resources and value and meaning, Gemini, the second house. Mercury square Neptune will definitely distort your thinking. It will be confusing. It will complicate things, misinterpretations. Communications are very confusing. It's really important that you are not engaged in any type of scandal. Even the most innocent white lies could really just turn into significant embarrassments, more convoluted cover-ups. You can see how this could easily come about on the world stage or just a more macrocosm level. More susceptible to believing all kinds of strange things, conspiracy things, extreme spiritual views. You need to protect yourself against loan sharks, pushy people, psychic vampires, right? If you have holes in your aura, these people are going to find it, right? And so Mercury square Neptune as well, I mean, is really challenging. All of those things I just talked about with the star Shiat or Beta Pegasi, which is that it can be really, really negative or it can be really positive, but it's only really positive for the people that are not invested in the battle, right? It's like, can you keep the beginner's mind as you are engaged in the battle? Can you be in the world but not of it? And Mercury conjunct Venus at the solstice point, 0 degrees Cancer, is going to make all of the familial, nurturing types of relationships that much more. You're just going to commit to something, right? And for the Gemini people, especially Gemini rising, it's going to have a lot to do with committing to, what is of inherent value to you. And, it certainly brings people together, encourages cooperation, diplomatic skills, negotiating skills, resolving conflicts, peaceful settlements to disputes. I think that that's a very beneficial way, and certainly something worth investing in and making a radical change of allegiance. And the radical change of allegiance is the phrase worth paying attention to here in terms of your personal interactions and where you are committing yourself in terms of resource and value, Gemini, because you're going to be changing based on all of these challenges that are coming about. But this is also a transit, Mercury square Venus, that is very beneficial. The solstice and the sun square Neptune are the same day, which is the 20th. So we'll just go ahead to that and show you. And of course, there's going to be other transits happening. Again, you may want to consider the Starseed Fellowship Tier 2, and that is at least get you the weekly astrology report, among other things, so that you can kind of get down into the more weekly details that we don't get here. But the sun square Neptune, it's going along with this square again. It's one last challenge to your vitality, making it harder to get motivated or enthusiastic about anything, especially as we are coming into the solstice and, really committing, right? Putting down roots, a point of no return, right? It is a point of maximum or minimum light, right? So there is a shifting of the seasonal cycle that is happening. And so to have it a square to Neptune can be, there's confusion, there's disappointment, battling against the odds, there's insecurity, guilt, over-idealization and gullibility too, right? Seeing only the best in people increases the chance of disillusionment with something like this, right? You have to be realistic. You have to actually see things for what they are, and it's very deceptive. So you have to be above board in all dealings, right? Like, don't necessarily take people's word for things. Like, you have to feel it out for yourself, and predators are going to quickly hone in on any soft side. The risk of exploitation as we are reaching a point of no return where you have to commit to something and set your roots down is really high with this square. And so there's all kinds of personal relationships may be subject to dishonesty and deception, but it's not all negative, right? You can really use this energy for social causes and charity work and using this type of energy safely, right? Ceremony, spiritual ceremony, right? Creativity, imagination, right? So yeah, there's a square. But again, there's that mutability of Gemini and all the mutable signs that's just like, I can move around this. I can choose to see this from a different vantage point and visualize something different, right? I may not be able to change all of these circumstances, but I can change my perspective. And yeah, I could get lost in the disillusionment of these situations. Now, there could be all kinds of issues in terms of infection and in terms of increased susceptibility to types of things, mental health issues, paranoia, depression. You just have to be aware of that, maybe not in yourself, but other people. And so again, your perspective can be mutable, and it's important that it it is if you find yourself really struggling with these squares, because it's going to be in this mutability that the Gemini person and all of us really are able to manage ourselves in the face of all of these challenges. Like I said, things are going to be moving fast. There's going to be a lot of uncomfortable energy. There's going to be a lot of challenges to the ego, to relationships, and for the Gemini people, to a sense of self and identity that is inevitably changing. And we need to get all the information and the facts and consider all the angles before we make a decision about something. And there's going to be plenty of support when we make those decisions, especially Venus and Mercury, the ruling planet of Gemini, coming into conjunction at 0 degrees Cancer, right? So that's going to be very supportive and very, in terms of relationships and communicating in relationships, for when it's time to really identify ourselves, which is on the solstice. So, and then we have the full moon in Capricorn right after that. So you'll have to come back for that report. So my friends, I think it might be worth it to spend I'm not going to do DJT's chart. Suffice it to say, my gosh, again, if you haven't figured out that we're, all part of central casting here, I don't know, just study astrology more. You'll see it. Oops. So we're going to get an animal card. So 1 second here, because I dropped it. Okay, so this is messages from Spirit Animal Guides. It's from a deck by Stephen D. Farmer. Of course, what came out? The walrus, right? The 2 tusks. Remain vigilant about the current situation. Pay attention to signs and omens, your intuition perhaps, and let them dictate your what? Your choices, right? The walrus. It's pretty obvious, Gemini. Remain vigilant, right? That if you need guidance, ask for it, right? But you also can't delude yourself, and you can't just fold up every time it gets challenging, because there's going to be a lot of challenges. And you also, if you're a person that really thrives on that challenge, you also can't just lose yourself when those challenges are dissolved too. Like sometimes it's the opposite. You're like, who am I without having something to fight? Remain vigilant. Look for the signs and the omens. Pay attention to them. I wouldn't say let them dictate your choices. I don't like that phrasing, but your intuition, right? Your heart is going to be, that's the bridge right there. And that's the Pisces energy, right? The higher heart, the compassion, the unconditional love. But as a human in this experience, it's the actual heart chakra itself, how we feel in that state that really guides us. So, all right, friends, I'm going to leave it there. One thing, I don't have the graphic for it right now, but there will be a solstice seasonal forecast on its way. It's going to be available for purchase through my website as a digital download. Or, of course, if you decide to subscribe through Subscribestar, become a monthly member, not only will you get the weekly astrology, you get a percentage off personal readings and sessions, but you also get access to all of these special astrology reports that I put out, that I usually put out for sale. They are another benefit and bonus of monthly membership. So, my friends, thank you. Remain vigilant. You can get on my mailing list by going to the link in the description box below. It says it right there, join the mailing list. It goes right to the homepage of my website, and you can sign up there. And that's where I usually announce things first, or social media. Either way, you'll get information soon. Or if you're subscribed to this channel on YouTube, you'll get it in the community tab. So take care of yourself, everyone. Enjoy the new moon. Lots of growing up that's going to be happening. And of course, growing pains are part of the process. So just be aware of it. Be prepared. Expect the best. Hope for the best. I wouldn't say expect the worst. Be prepared for the challenges along the way. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you on the next video. Full moon in Capricorn. Take care, everyone.